If you have that, no one can take it away from you. The message for your audience is that it's very important for the student to be.
Ayo, it's Amy. We have a very special guest today, Jason, who is a college admissions expert. He will be spilling all the secrets to your most burning college application questions surrounding these major categories. And in the end, we'll find out if a top college really matters. Super excited for today's chat. Hi, Jason. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, excited to be here. Thank you for having me on. My name's Jason. I was born and raised in San Francisco. I went to a public school. I got into Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Columbia, UChicago, Swarthmore, and a couple other schools. And from that experience, I started to talk with some of the admissions officers, learning about the process. I ultimately chose Harvard. My concentration was social studies. I worked at an investment bank, worked at a $20 billion mutual fund before switching gears to work at Uber. And I've also worked on a political campaign. One of the things that we try to do is bring that experience of education and real world development with our students.
Tell us a little bit about your consultancy.
Our first year, actually, we worked with a student from central China in a public school there. She had a 1320 SAT. That year, we helped her get into Harvard as one of only 8 admissions from all of China, which was kind of crazy. Since then, we've kept focusing on getting better every year. Last year, which was our 4th class, we actually became the #1 ranked company in terms of sending students from China into Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Princeton, MIT, Caltech. High-level advisors, in addition to myself, they include a former Yale admissions officer, former McKinsey consultant, a current Google Alphabet machine learning engineer. We're excited to work with really motivated students and bring them the advisors that we think can help them achieve the next level.
It's really incredible that you can help students from China so much, because that's actually the most difficult demographic to get into these top schools. With that expertise, it seems that you can really help any demographic.
We've kind of cut our teeth on that cohort, and there are a lot of great lessons that we enjoy sharing with our clients and now your audience.
Looking forward to hearing your insights today. If you would like to work with Endurable, please remember to check out my description box. If you say that Amy sent you, you'll save $500. So go check it out. Do admissions officers have a point system to rank candidates?
Each college has their own policies and processes, but generally the big picture across all the universities are similar. Many of them do have a point system because the point system helps them with ranking candidates. So we know that Harvard kind of categorizes students across categories such as academics, athletic, extracurricular, and personal factors. Some colleges use more factors, some might use less. But in any case, the overall big goal is for admissions officers to find what my partner Susan, she likes to call gems. And gems can be very different from each other. You could be a gem because of your academic perspective, or you could be a gem because of your leadership or service. It's really hard to define across the entire student body, but each person should be really focused, I think, on how do they develop themselves in their own unique way, and how do they distinguish themselves at a very high level, which could include starting to contribute to society. I think a lot of people are like, oh, I'll wait until my career before I start thinking about the real world and how to contribute to the real world. Our argument is that you should start as early as possible.
Makes sense. It sounds like you would have an edge if you start contributing to the real world, because many students don't know that. What is the most important quality do you think that admissions officers look for?
There are 3 general areas that we could kind of simplify it into. Does the student have a track record of excellence? If you are applying to a top tier university or liberal arts college because of their track record of excellence, of course, they're going to be looking at you from a similar perspective. Everybody wants to say, you know, I want to be wealthy, I want to be famous, I want to go into a great school, but not as many people have the track record or the work ethic or the talent to really get there. Number 2, I think it's very important for the student to be community oriented from 2 different levels. The first level is that generally what we accomplish in life is correlated with our value to society. The more that we could actually help society solve problems, the more more our value we could potentially realize. But the second part of community is you have to remember when you apply to a school, you're trying to find a place to live, learn, and grow for 4 years. So how do you interact within your community? How do you contribute to it? Or might you be a detractor? And then the third, which is harder to define, is what uniqueness does the student bring to the table? Because there's only a limited number of spots at these top institutions. And of course, they want people who bring some level of expertise or unique perspective, because that kind of ability or perspective or talent can really make the overall community stronger.
I like how the first point kind of relates to the concept where if you want to be successful, you need to act like that successful person would act. So if you think about your idol, like how do they do the day-to-day, and embody that before you get to that point, because that's the only way you can get there. What do you think was strong or distinctive about your college application?
I was really focused on all three components: your grades, the difficulty of your course load, your awards, and your honors. I was very involved with politics locally. I was very hyper involved with my school. Every lunch I would have meetings. The essays and the interview can be very helpful in illuminating the reader, which is the admissions officer. What is your uniqueness? I had a theater background. I also did mock trial and a lot of advocacy, trying to explain that experience, what that meant to me and what that might mean to the future was helpful.
Is it better to get straight A's in regular classes or some B's in APs and honors classes?
If you're applying for a top 10 or 20 national university, for example, a lot of the admission readers are graduates of that school. We're not going to fool them into thinking, oh, I took this easier class. It's the equivalent as an A in an AP class. The underlying theme is that students aiming for the best should challenge themselves with the highest level courses and curriculum as they can, and bring the performance that shows their ability to develop that track record of excellence.
So the short answer would be to indeed try for the higher level courses.
I think so.
Considering now that test optional policies exist, how are colleges considering the test scores, and should the student submit a score?
Students who are able to submit a great score, of course, should. It's a great data point. Now, if you did not achieve a great score, then I think the question becomes a little bit more gray. It depends what school you're applying for. Also, how many resources you've had. If you've gone to a private US-based high school and you've had the resources to take the exam versus, for example, in Beijing, we've had a lot of AP exams and other exams that were canceled. Those are two different stories and explanations for why you might not have a score. It gets a little bit more muddy if you don't have a good score, but generally speaking, if you do have the ability and the resources to take the exam and you have a decent score, we recommend you submit it.
How does the selectivity of a school influence the necessity of a test score?
That's a great question. If you don't mind, I'm going to have to take a step back from that. If we talk about the top schools, Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Princeton, MIT, their admissions rates are around 3 to 4%. And you might go, oh, wow, that's hard enough. 3 to 4 out of 100. But you also have to think it's not really out of 100. It's 3 or 4% of the students who apply. And generally, the people who apply to those schools, they're going to pretty much be in the top 10% of the student body. So it's really 3 to 4 out of 1,000, because it's 3 to 4% of the top 10% of the student body. And that's a huge step change a lot of students are not thinking about. And you also have to think the competition at that level, it's just all these wonderful, inspiring people at that level. They're all high performers. How do you distinguish a top 30 out of 1,000 and a top 3 out of 1,000? That's 10 times harder than top 30. To go back to your question, you want as many strong data points as possible in your favor.
What would you recommend then for a student to do if their score may be lower than the average MIT student?
We work with a couple. They're hard workers. They're very talented, but they might not be as talented in showing it on the test side specifically. In which case, you should pretty much have another area where you demonstrate high level of excellence. That should be enunciated clearly in the application. If you're weak in one area, you really need stronger areas elsewhere to make up for it.
How do admissions officers weigh the stats versus the essays and experience? Is the essay a decisive factor?
We believe that there are two questions that an admission officer generally goes through. The first is a student qualified? If the student's not qualified, they're not going to waste their time reading the rest of the application. Basically, can the student graduate from the college program? Some students do get cut, and I do think that metrics are weighted more heavily in that first round. The second question, though, is the difference from being a top 80% to a top 3%. And that question is the student special? How a student communicates that and shows that to the admissions officer, that's going to be very different. It's going to change from year to year. The meta of what's happening in the application process could also change based on YouTubers and other people's advice. It's really hard to say what can make a student special one year. It could be very common the next year and make it very hard for a student to distinguish themselves.
With a high level of competition, in the end, if everything else about equal, then the essay could potentially be the deciding factor.
Especially for the most selective schools, I think essays and rec letters are weighted pretty heavily, because if you think about the essays, whether you realize it or not, they tell the reader how you think. What topic you choose to prioritize in your essay is an indicator of what you prioritize in your real life. So the essays are incredibly important at the highest levels.
How would you showcase a strong personality, whether it's in the essay or in the other parts of your application?
One is kind of how the admission officer can hear it from the student, which would be through the essays. Another is through rec letters, give a sense of what other people perceive you to be about and what you've done. And I think a third is your action. We always say actions speak louder than words. So what are your actions? Did you only do academic things in high school, or did your actions indicate other priorities?
There seems to be some pressure around what activities are impressive. What extracurricular activities should students do?
The first component is that generally there are themes that are important to life. If they're important to life, they're also probably important to college, such as our communication ability, our creativity, how we work with other people, potentially our leadership. So there are multiple things to cover. You could cover them through a variety of activities. So one, I like to talk with my students about what does their portfolio say, how they spend their time. But then at the same time, we should prioritize certain things. In this case, when you're talking with a student about their themes, you should really emphasize what the student cares about. If you think about, if we want to apply to the elite college, we need to find people who are self-motivated. Their learning potential is much greater. I would focus heavily on what is the student interested in, and however we can move the activities to be related to that. Students might not know what they love, in which case we should show that we're passionate about trying new things and trying to find what we love as early as possible. And that's good for life anyway. You could focus on building the skills to be more successful. There's a balance between being focused and planning, but also being adaptable.
There is some concern about if you do too many different things that it seems you're unfocused. Would you say there's a risk in that, or how would you navigate it?
What I would say to students is focus on what matters. And for each student, that could be very different. And if you think it matters, you could probably communicate why it matters easier to your reader. Even if you have one clear passion, there are other areas that you probably could be working on.
That's reassuring, I think, for students. And at the end of the day, that it's important to be proactive and not to be doing something where you feel resistance, because then that's not you staying true to yourself, which is what the admissions officers want to see. Do colleges look at your social media?
They probably have looked at some, but overall, I would not expect them to check everybody's or even a significant number. Maybe think twice. Maybe there's a reason why you might be concerned.
Are there any red flags to be careful about?
A big one is negativity. Some students are trying to say, here are my challenges. Everybody goes through challenges, but I don't think it's enough to just say, hey, here are my challenges. In a way, the essay is written in a negative light. I'm an investor, for example. The only car company to grow since the pandemic above 30 to 50% rates is Tesla. And a lot of car companies use the chip shortage as an excuse. But then you see an attitude difference between those car companies and Tesla. Tesla engineers, they rewrote code to use whatever chips they could get their hands on. It's a different mentality. As a college admissions officer, what kind of student would I want to invest in?
That's an awesome example. And it helps colleges see the student is definitely going to face challenges in college. Like, how can I see them getting through that. What are some of the biggest mistakes you think that students make when putting together their application?
I do think that you should get at least one outside reader because you write your own essays. You know your life very intimately, but you don't write about your life in a self-contained way where a stranger could just pick it up and know what you are talking about. That is one important check that not a lot of students avail themselves to. That becomes an issue. Will a college admissions officer spend more time trying to research or connect the dots if it's not self-contained? I don't think so. The college admissions officer will say this student doesn't know how to clearly communicate and reflect what the reader knows and needs to know and move on, because at the highest level, that's a skill set we should all have.
Yeah, being able to present yourself and think from the reader's perspective. Are the senior year grades important?
I would argue yes. Personally, I worked 80 to 100 hour weeks during high school. The jobs that I took after college are also 80 to 100 hour week jobs. Being able to do that in high school helped me beyond college. I don't think it's a good data point if someone sees you slacking off when people say like, oh, you could slack off a little bit. If a student might need to, for example, send an update letter or a waitlist letter, and at the same time the college sees a waitlist letter but also sees slacking off on grades, it's not a good data point.
Slacking off might also show lack of proactivity where, oh, I only worked hard when I'm told that I have to work hard, right?
Yeah. For the positive side, I think students want to maximize every chance they get. There will be a subset of people that will get in from the waitlist or get in from an update letter. When I applied to Harvard, I actually was deferred the first time and I thought I was done for, but I definitely redoubled my efforts, kept doing what I thought I should do, and thankfully everything worked out. I think that's a good philosophy for life too. If we do what we should do and try to achieve goals that we think are meaningful, the exact plan might not work out, but generally things will work out.
If you work hard, the opportunities will come. But if you're not ready for the opportunities to come, then it's like you won't receive them at all.
And they might be opportunities you didn't expect in the first place, but could be better.
What advice would you give students who are in the beginning of their high school years, and any advice regarding how to build their story?
I think if they reflect on the stat of the 3 or 4%, not 3 or 4% generally speaking, but the 3 or 4% of the top 10%, I think there's a lot of implication from that data point that students need to start working on as early as possible.
Basically all the stuff that was mentioned before, to just build that up as early as possible.
I think it's worthwhile for your younger audience to really think about that, because that could help them with their prioritization, that could help them with their questions. It could potentially be an advantage for them if they're able to start addressing that earlier.
I agree. That's why I share the information on the internet, such that I feel like the earlier you're aware of something, the more you can just prepare for it. Because otherwise, when you get to that point, it might be too late and you can't do anything about that.
And we're responsible for being aware. You know, it might seem a little bit unfair, like, hey, some people can afford endurables services, but we do offer scholarships for families in financial need. It might seem unfair, oh, some other people have more, but that's life. Going back to the Tesla example, they started out as David against a bunch of Goliath in the industry. Tesla's almost gone bankrupt. I don't think they use that as an excuse, like, oh, or resources are much more limited compared to GM. They had to find a way. I think the message for your audience, and that's why I appreciate being here, is that if your goal is to get to a top tier university, go find a way. There is always a way. We're very lucky in that sense. For example, our first year, helping a student from the middle of China, literally that high school has never sent a student to an international school, and helping that one student find a way to go from her high school to Harvard, that's something that actually is a very common occurrence. If you are lucky enough to go to a school like Caltech, Harvard, and a bunch of other schools, you'll see a lot of people who pulled themselves up by their bootstrap. They are very much more admirable and inspiring. I would argue if you've had to work harder to achieve a goal, that makes you much stronger.
I think that's really the message I want to tell my viewers as well, that like it's really about you, because you have so much potential. It's all about you going out there to use that potential and to believe that you have that in the first place. For me, for example, I actually didn't use any paid resources to prepare for the ACT, SAT. Everyone has challenges, but how are you going to overcome that and still work as hard as you can to get to your goal? At the end of the day, if you don't get into where you want, it's okay, as long as you know that you worked hard. You won't have any regrets.
We like to tell our students, if you built the skill set to be successful in life in general, you don't need a piece of paper to say that you should have a better chance understand. But what's funny is if you build that skill set early enough, you're more attractive to the institutions that people love. I would say focus on the skill set.
Foundations and building that up even from freshman, sophomore year to get you better set up for junior year when you decide to go really hard on whatever difficulties you have. $1,000,000 question. How important is going to a top school really? And have you found the brand, network, or other aspects beneficial to you after graduation?
I do think that going to a top school is helpful, but I hesitate to say like, hey, everyone should try to do it. We should look at options and what is the best option. And for many students, going to a top school is a strong form of validation. These admissions, they help validate your track record before college, right? They say that at the very minimum, you did enough and you were focused enough and you were proactive and knowledgeable enough to at least get to that standards. After college, your diploma kind of shows that data point to employers, potential investors, potential clients, things like that. And that's a hard data point that not everyone can achieve. And what's wonderful is that some people donate a lot of money, but most people who achieve that validation, it's not because of their donations. It's because of their skill sets and their track record. I think a top school can be helpful. I don't think that it will confine you to success or confine you to the opposite of success if you achieve or don't achieve it. What's more important is the skill set, the mentality, the life perspective that it takes to get there. If you have that, no one can take it away from you. Of course, the world is littered with examples of people who've hustled from nowhere without these sheets of paper that were able to accomplish great things.
For sure. Thank you. Any final words of advice you would like to share here today?
One thing that I think about a lot recently, we basically all know how important nutrition is to someone's health. And we know that the nutrition you give to your plant determines how big and how quickly and how healthy it is. But I think that's also true of our social circles, who we hang around with. Their priorities get reflected in us and their learnings. And I like to encourage people to find diverse social circles for different things so they can continue learning and growing. But I also think a healthy mentality is very valuable as well. And I know people talk about mental health a lot, but I think a healthy mentality, maybe it could be a little bit different. How we think about the world, whether we express gratitude or whether we expect great things to happen, is a huge difference in mentality in terms of how someone responds. So I think my advice is to reflect, refine, improve, upgrade who we spend our time with and how we think about the world.
I definitely agree with everything you said. The kind of mentality aspect is really what helped me get through high school and Caltech. It was so difficult, but I think the key aspect was my friends and the kinds of habits that are developed from the habit of how you think.
Wonderful.
Awesome. Super helpful insights today, Jason. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with all of us today. Jason has a really awesome company that helps students get into their top college choices, and they have really awesome stats. So check that out. Customized advice is the most important thing you can get help with to get into your dream school, in addition to advice like you see here today. So make sure to check out Endurable in the description. And again, say that Amy brought you there so you can save $500. And if you want to see a specific example of how I got into a top school, then click here. I totally wish I had someone like Jason to tell me all these things.